right, everybody, let's go ahead and get rolling. If anybody comes in late, they are coming in late. So, all right, welcome to the Endurance Sports University Triathlon Study Hall. This is the first one that we're doing. I have a pretty good idea of how I want this to go and what my basic plan is. We'll see if we can stick to that and make it happen. So let's go ahead and get rolling through this. So a little bit about me, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ryan Reel. I'm the founder and head coach at Endurance Sports University, USA Triathlon Level 2 coach, USA Triathlon Youth and Junior coach, master's degree in exercise physiology, biomechanics, got another master's in organic and biological chemistry, was a USA Triathlon High Performance Team head coach and team director from 2011 to 2015, was a Training Bible elite coach from 2013 until earlier this year, and I decided to head out on my own, and ultimately the founder of Endurance Sports University. So a little bit about Endurance Sports University for you guys, since this is brand new. It's basically the international leader in triathlon education and coaching resources and services for athletes, self-coached athletes, and for coaches, all alike. So there is something for everybody. Athletes obviously would like to have a coach. The coach-athlete relationship is very well understood. But what happens with athletes that are self-coached, that have a really good understanding but still need a little bit of oversight, still need a little bit of management, or what happens with athletes that simply can't afford the regular monthly coaching dues. So we have services for both of those types of athletes, and then ultimately services and education for coaches. So that's not only the continuing education units from USA Triathlon, but that's the how to become a better coach. The science behind it, the exercise physiology, the biomechanics, the programming, the actual how to be a top tier coach. And then along with that, there are also all of the business services that are out there that, quite frankly, triathlon coaches in general are never really taught anything about. The majority of the triathlon coaches I've ever met, cycling, any endurance coaches, they have a tremendous passion for working with athletes, but they simply don't have that education on how to set up, how to run, and how to manage a business and how to make it grow. So this is kind of ultimately what Endurance Sports University is aiming to provide. The official launch date will be Monday, July 13th. So keep your eyes out for some emails coming out later this week that there's going to be a pre-launch special for the membership program that we have, or the M Pro. So keep an eye out for that if that's something that you're interested in, or some other specials that are coming along. So, all right, the agenda for tonight. I'm going to give a short presentation. It's going to last maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about hydration and electrolytes very briefly, and then ultimately open it up to questions and answers for you guys. So let's go ahead and get into the hydration, dehydration. Ultimately, if you guys have any questions as we're coming along, everybody obviously is muted right now. When I go through the presentation, I'm going to keep everybody muted. Go ahead and ask the questions as you have them. And then if I see them while I'm going through, I'll answer them. If not, once I get through the electrolyte and hydration part of it, I'll go through and hammer out the questions. And then ultimately, once we are completed with the short presentation, then it's just going to be opened up for question and answer. And ultimately, you guys and gals will type your questions into the question box. And then what I will ultimately do is I will bring you onto the call and have you ask your question so the whole group can hear it, and then I will do my best to answer it. If you don't have a mic or anything like that, then type that in when you type in your question, so I don't try to bring you on and you don't have a microphone. I'll just try to read the question and answer it. So that's basically what we're looking at. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so hydration and electrolytes. This is a very long and complex topic. We're going to attempt to cover it in 5 to 10 minutes, might creep up to 15. But I want to get the main points of hydration and how hydration relates to electrolytes. All right, so hydration, taking in fluids, electrolytes inside the body. The main one is sodium. We have potassium and magnesium also, but if for every basically 500 milligrams or millimoles of magnesium, we have about 9,000 of potassium, and we have about 20,000 of sodium. All right, so when we look at the relative amounts of those different electrolytes, sodium is the key player. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look more closely at this. All right, so the human body in general, and this is one of the main points, the human body is far more concerned about the concentration of the body fluids, not the mass or the weight. All right, the human body does not much care whether you have 5 grams or 15 grams of sodium. The human body doesn't ultimately care whether you have 5 quarts or 10 quarts of fluids in your system. They ultimately care what the concentration is, right? So if we divide the mass by the volume, that ultimately is going to give us our concentration in grams per liter or milligrams per milliliter or whatever it may be, right? So the human body far more concerned about the concentration, not the mass or the weight. All right, so another big term, osmolality, fancy science term there. Basically, what it's meaning is the concentration of the fluids in the body, right? So when you see the word osmolality, it's just thinking concentration. All right, so when we look at the concentrations of electrolytes inside the body and how we can affect that with hydration, a small increase in osmolality, somewhere about 1%, is going to increase or trigger the release of the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Right now, what that ultimately is going to do is it's going to prevent your body from losing any more water through urine. Right, and it might have a little bit of a reduction in the sweat rate, but primarily it's going to make it so that you're not going to lose water through peeing. All right, so that's what happens when we have a small disturbance in osmolality, right? So the concentration is now different than what we normally want it to be, all right? So if this isn't sufficient, we have another response to this, right? So if the ADH is not sufficient to prevent the water loss, then the thirst mechanism is going to kick in, right? And what that basically is the threshold is somewhere around 4%. If there's a 4% or more disturbance, your body is going to tell you, hey, I'm thirsty. Right. So depending on, the time of year and where everybody on the call lives, I know that when I lived in Arizona, if I had to walk down the street to Circle K to grab a bottle of water or whatever it was I'm going to go get, I know that if it's hot enough and I'm walking fast enough, that by the time I'm going to get to Circle K, I'm going to be thirsty. Right. So that right here that's a 4% disturbance in osmolality. Right. So you can see the threshold for that, not super high. Right. It's not, we don't have to go run. We don't have to go do cycling intervals. It's a far lower threshold. All right. So ultimately, when you consume fluids, it's going to dilute out the body fluids or the concentration of the electrolytes in this case, returning that concentration back down to below where the first mechanism threshold is. Right. So let me say that again, because that's quite a wordy sentence. All right. So when we're out training, right? Let's say we're out on a bike ride, we're out for a 3-hour ride. If my body says, hey, Ryan, I'm thirsty, I need some fluids, right? What my go-to needs to be is ultimately plain water, right? Because that's, the human body's been around a lot longer than Gatorade has, right? So the human body is pretty darn good at operating off of water. So when my body says, hey, I'm thirsty, it's telling me, put some water in me, right? So if I have an increase in osmolality, right? So a 4% disturbance or somewhere in that area, when I pour more water into my body, I'm ultimately returning that concentration back down to below where the first mechanism threshold is, right? So let me explain that a little bit more on the next slide. All right, so salty sweat, right? So what exactly does this mean? If your body's going to maintain the sodium serum concentration, right, and that's all the body is concerned about, what's the concentration, right? So sweat rate will increase and decrease. The amount of sodium that is with the sweat has the potential to increase and decrease based off of, do I need to lose more water? Do I need to retain more water? That's the primary response in sweat rate. Right? So the body will adjust. It will do its best to maintain that sodium serum concentration. Right? So one big question is, do I need to take in additional salt? Right? And you noticed that earlier I did say plain water, not Gatorade, not Noon, not CarboPro, not Infinite, not UCAN, none of that stuff, just plain water, right? So the question is, do I need to take in salt? Do I need some special electrolyte concoction that is, with carbohydrates, or do I need to take in gels, or do I need to take in chews, or do I need to take some salt pills, or whatever it is, right? That's a great question because people spend a tremendous amount of money on this stuff. Ultimately, the answer is your sweat is salty. So do we need to take in salt? Let's take a look before we answer that question and see what's actually going on inside the body and outside the body when it relates to the concentration of sodium. All right. So inside your body, the concentration of sodium is approximately 140 millimolar. Right. So those of you that don't know what millimolar is, it's a science term of a way to calculate an absolute amount of something. All right. So 140 is the concentration. When we look at the concentration of sodium in sweat, it's only 20 to 60 millimolar, right? So that is anywhere from 14 to 43% of what is in our body fluid, right? So if we are sweating out a bunch of electrolytes, I'm not losing 140 millimolar in concentration of sodium in every single drop that comes out of my body. I'm losing somewhere between maybe 20 to 60, right? So basically, if I lose a liter of sweat, it has a far larger effect on volume than it does the solute, right? Volume being the fluids inside of our body, solute being sodium, right? Because I'm losing a lot more water than I am sodium, right? So that's what's actually taking place. So what the heck does that mean? What does that mean to you guys? Am I sitting here in front of my computer rambling on about, hey, this is some cool science stuff? I need to give you something that you can take home and you can use this week. You can use this weekend when you go out on your training ride, right? So ultimately, what it means is the more that you sweat, you don't reduce the amount of sodium or the sodium concentration in your body. You're actually increasing it, which is going to make you thirstier, right? That's the disturbance in osmolality. All right, so let's take a look at an example of this that'll tie all this together. So let's say that this can that I have up here is a replica of the human body while we're out training. All right, so inside of this can, I'm going to put 10 ounces of water and I'm going to put 10 grams of sodium chloride, right? So all stuff that we can visualize, we can imagine 10 ounces of water sitting in a water bottle, 10 grams of sodium chloride. Got it, right? So there's my 10 ounces of water. There's my 10 grams of sodium, right? When I do the math, I divide the solute by the solvent, right? So sodium chloride or the electrolyte divided by the fluid. So 10 divided by 10. My concentration is 1. It's 1 gram per ounce. All right, makes sense so far? So that being said, let's say we go out this weekend and we go for a 1-hour run. All right, so what happens during the run? We're going to sweat, we're going to lose fluid, we're going to lose electrolytes, right? So let's say that I lose 1 ounce of water from this system while I'm out running for an hour. I'm only going to lose, and let's say that we're a super duper crazy salty sweater, right? I'm only going to lose half a gram of sodium, right? So if I take a look, what does my can or the human body look like after that 1-hour run? I have 9 ounces of water. I have 9.5 grams of sodium, right? So ultimately, if we do that same math as up here on the top, 9.5 grams of sodium chloride divided by 9 ounces of water, that gives my concentration back at 1.05, right? So the question is, have I increased the concentration of sodium or have I decreased the concentration of sodium, right? And ultimately, you can see that the original concentration was 1, the new concentration is 1.05, right? So as I'm sweating, I am creating a situation where my sodium concentration is increasing. That's making me thirstier. What happens then if you grab a big old bottle of some sort of electrolyte concoction and take 2 or 3 gigantic mouthfuls of that? Yes, you're adding more fluid back in, but what else are you adding in? You're adding in sodium, right? So in general, do you need to take in salt? The answer is no, you don't have to, right? Would I, if a client ever came to me and they seem to at least 2 or 3 times a year and we have this discussion and I explain it to them and at the end of the conversation, my answer is, if you want to take the salt pills, you can take the salt pills. It's not going to really jack you up unless you do something really strange with the amount of sodium or salt pills that you're taking in. If it's going to give you peace of mind, then by all means, let's take full advantage of that and take the salt pills, right? And ultimately, when the athletes, they get this information from me, they go out and they try it. They'll try it on a 2-hour, 3-hour ride. They'll come back and they'll be like, holy cow, I don't have to spend, $30 on a bottle of whatever electrolyte pills anymore, right? So this is basically what we're taking a look at. This is an example of a system that is showing you graphically how this takes place, right? So what's the bottom line answer, right? You can't lose enough sodium in any real meaningful amount, even if you're a super duper salty sweater, right? You can't lose it from sweat. All right. That being said, if we have, an Ironman, we're going to be out there for 9, 10, 12, 15, 17 hours. If you don't take in any electrolytes for that entire period of time, yeah, you're going to have a problem, right? But I would imagine that if I kicked a poll up here right now and said, hey, how many of you can name a sports nutrition product that doesn't have electrolytes in it? I don't think that very many of you, if any at all, can actually name one that doesn't. I know there's a couple of you on here that do, so don't hop all over that because we've had this discussion. But in general, sports nutrition products, they have sodium in it. That's the big selling point that these sports nutrition companies have come up with, and they've grabbed a hold of the science, and they have kind of told only part of the story, right? And it ultimately multi-million-dollar business every single year, right? So that's what we're looking at. Some other concerns to take into account here real quick, because I'm sure that some of these questions will pop up. What happens if calories are tied up in the fluids, right? So ultimately, if you have calories tied up in fluids, you got to take the fluids in to get the calories, and that's on a set nutrition plan, right? That you have to execute whether you're thirsty or not. You either get the calories in or you're going to have a bigger problem. But when it comes to thirst, the answer is very simple, very, very simple. Drink water, right? So ultimately, flip side of this real quick, if the sodium concentration does drop, right, from somebody drinking too much water, right, you're ultimately diluting out the sodium concentration, right? So if you're consuming too much fluid, now we're looking at hyponatremia, right? So too low of a sodium concentration, right? So this is kind of confusing at this point, right? Because I'm telling you, hey, when you're thirsty, drink water, right? But don't drink too much, because then you're going to have, you're going to get into the hyponatremia area, right? And hyponatremia, that's no joke, right? Because that presents itself just as dehydration. So you roll into an aid station and they look at you and they're like, ooh, you're, not sweating, you're cold and clammy, you're nauseous, you're kind of, a little bit out of it. What's the last thing you want them to do if you're looking at hyponatremia? Stick you in the arm with an IV, right? So ultimately, hyponatremia is a big deal. So what's the answer, right? You tell me to drink water, but don't drink too much water, right? Very simple answer. Your body's going to tell you when you're thirsty. Listen to it, right? Don't come up with some crazy elaborate, I have to drink 32 ounces every 30 minutes in order to be optimally hydrated, right? Unless you have undergone some monumentally awesome exercise physiology testing in a lab and spent thousands of dollars to determine what that actual answer is, your plan is not as accurate as you think it is. All right. So ultimately, when your body tells you you're thirsty, grab the water bottle, drink some plain water. Right. Very simple. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have in the way of questions. Anybody have any questions on the hydration, dehydration that we've gone over so far? So let's go ahead and just open this up to any questions that you guys have. Go ahead and type them in the question box, and I'll go ahead and do my best to answer them. All right, here is a great question. All right, so this is from Greg. Greg said, I used to cramp on long rides, started adding in electrolytes to my water bottles, and haven't cramped since. Don't drink any more than I used to do. All right, so, kind of getting into another topic, Greg, great question. I think maybe next week or in one of the future study hall calls, we'll spend a lot more time talking about cramping. But let me throw a teaser out here at you for the answer, which I think will get you going down the right road. So if we're going to say that electrolytes, the concentration of electrolytes inside the body, is in some way responsible for cramping or for not cramping, right? That seems to be the common mantra that is being put out by the sports nutrition companies, and a lot of people, have had a lot of success with stopping cramping or having less cramping, when they start taking in the electrolytes. But when we take a look at the science, there's some questions that we have to answer to prove or disprove any theory when it comes to cramping. All right. So the first question is, what muscles tend to be cramping when we are swimming, biking, and running, right? Second question, when are they cramping? Right? So with those two questions, right, we can kind of start getting into, do the electrolytes really play a role, or are they something that maybe a sports nutrition company picked up on and said, hey, let's push this party line and sell some more electrolytes, right? So let me ask you guys some questions and then I'll ultimately answer them. So if we're going to say that losing electrolytes is causing cramping, all right, That's the basic theme that the sports nutrition companies are coming up with. If that's the case, would you all agree with me that the concentration of electrolytes within your body, that's a systemic concentration, right? I don't have more electrolytes in my quadriceps than I do in my glutes, and then I have a lot more in my right bicep, but my left bicep has a lower concentration, right? So I think we would all agree the concentration of sodium is constant throughout the body, all right? So if that's the case, why have you not ridden down the road on your bicycle and had your face lock up in a full cramp? Why have we not been riding down the road in a bicycle and both my biceps cramp up, just absolutely lock up, right? And the reason is those aren't the muscles that we're using, right? We're using the lower body. We're using the legs. We're using the glutes. And those are the active muscles that we're using while we're training, right? So when we ask the original couple questions, what muscles tend to cramp up? The ones that we're using tend to cramp up, right? So saying that electrolyte concentration or electrolyte depletion is responsible for cramping, right? Which is ultimately what we're saying when we make the statement, when I add electrolytes in to my system, I don't have cramps. That means we're increasing the concentration of electrolytes, right? So that is to correct a lower concentration of electrolytes is the theory. Okay, so if that's the case, why am I not having weird cramps? Why are both my pecs not locking up while I'm riding down the road? Why is my face not going into a full-on cramp? Right? It's ultimately what tends to cramp the muscles that we're using. Right? So that's kind of a big hit on the electrolytes and that causing or being responsible for cramping. Right? The second big point is, when do cramps take place? Right? We don't very often start out on a run and get 20, 30 steps into it and have our hamstrings lock up. Right? The cramping on the bike, cramping on the run, that normally takes place a lot later in the training session or in the race, right? Would everybody agree with me there? Right? So if that's the case, the muscles that we are using are the ones that are cramping, and they're cramping towards the end of whatever the session is, whether it's a training session, whether it's a race, right? So what I would propose, and I'll get more into this on one of the next study hall calls that we do, is the electrolyte concentration doesn't really have much to do, if anything, to do with cramping, right? What has to do with cramping is ultimately neuromuscular fatigue, right? So it's asking more from your body than it has been prepared to do through training, ultimately. Right? So it has to do with muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs and some other anatomy and physiology based structures and the interactions between the two. But Greg, to give you kind of a quickie on that, electrolytes, there isn't a lot of proof at all that they play any real role in cramping, right? But ultimately, Greg, if you putting electrolytes in your bottles is preventing you from cramping, keep putting electrolytes in your bottle. Absolutely. All right. So just keep that in mind. All right. So what other questions do we got? We got some more coming in. Another one from Greg to kind of go along with that. Greg also mentioned not a big drinker when he's riding, normally drinking 50 ounces on a 60-mile ride or so. So if we say 60 miles, we'll say 2.5, 3 hours, somewhere in there maybe. 50 ounces, we're looking at 2 large water bottles, basically. So that's a little bit on the low side, I would imagine, but really it just depends on your unique physiology. Like I said, with the hydration and the electrolytes, if your body's telling you you're thirsty and you're withholding water, then you're running a risk. If your body's not telling you you're thirsty, then your body's telling you you're not thirsty, right? So it really is just depending on each person and their unique physiology. So yeah, you're welcome, Greg. No problem, man. All right, so I got a question from Lisa. I have a sneaky suspicion that Roberta is with Lisa right now. So next question is, so bananas, are they necessary? Right, so bananas, what's the big thing that people promote bananas for, right? It's the potassium inside the banana, right? So keep something in mind. For every gram of potassium in my body, I have approximately 2 grams of sodium, right? So the sodium becomes a far bigger and more important electrolyte. So do you need to take the bananas in order to get the electrolytes? Again, no, I don't think you personally do. Taking bananas in for some, relatively high glycemic index carbs, some instantaneous fuel. Sure, it's a great source of fuel. Absolutely. So, good question. Good question. All right. Hey, Matt. All right. How long does it take before someone gets into or suffers from hyponatremia? Great question, Matt. All right. So basically, hyponatremia is when we have diluted out the concentration of sodium in our body to a point that it becomes critically low, right? And that really that's going to depend on the person. What their sweat rate is, what their physiology is, what their training status is, how well have they trained, how well have they not trained or prepared for an event. Um, Hyponatremia normally is going to take a while to get into. They really first started seeing hyponatremia with marathons, and they were starting to see it in the guys and gals that were out there running, 6, 7, 8 hour marathons, and they basically found that the people that were suffering from hyponatremia were on some sort of hydration plan that was you need to drink a set number of ounces of water or Gatorade or both per hour or per 15 minutes or per 30 minutes. And ultimately what you had people doing was force feeding themselves water or Gatorade because that's what somebody had told them. And they basically dilute out the concentration of sodium to a point where it presents a very life-threatening situation. And there's been quite a few situations that occurred. Majority of them, I believe, were in the 80s, some in the early 90s, where people were dying from running a marathon because they would go out and they were told, hey, you need to replace your fluid. If you lose 10 ounces, you got to take 10 ounces in. So they're chugging water, they're chugging Gatorade, and ultimately, hyponatremia, if I remember correctly, wasn't even really acknowledged as a medical concern until the late 70s or early 80s, because nobody knew what it was. And I think the way it originally came to be was ultimately there was a scientist, I believe in South Africa, who was looking at these people running I believe it was the Comrades Marathon, and they're just chugging and chugging and chugging water and chugging and chugging and chugging sports drink. And they, regardless of how much they drank, they just looked dehydrated because hyponatremia presents itself the same way that dehydration does. So what they were finding was these people would, come to an aid station or get to the end of the event, and the volunteers or the medical staff would be like, wow, you're dehydrated, right? Classic signs of dehydration: confusion, lack of coordination, cold and clammy, shallow breathing, reduced sweat rate, that type of stuff, right? And then you can get into they falling over, passing out, all that type of stuff. Hyponatremia presents the exact same way. So what you had happening was people would come in to an aid station or cross the finish line, and the EMT or the physician that was there would grab a hold of them and go, "You're dehydrated. Let's get you in and slap an IV in you." And what they're ultimately doing is even reducing out the sodium even more, and ultimately killed people, right? So it leads to like a swollen brain, which ultimately is going to create its own set of neurological problems. So it's a thing that takes a while, or a very dedicated effort. I think it was a few years ago. I think it was a high school football player in Georgia who had some massive cramping in a practice in the beginning of the kind of end of the summer, beginning of the school year, and his coaches said you got to drink more water. So this kid drank 2 gallons of water, over a very short period of time, and found himself in a hypernatremic situation and ultimately passed away from it. So it's something that you really got to work towards, or just be really unaware of what hyponatremia is in order to get there. So great question, Matt. All right, we got Lisa again. Hold on, Lisa. Let me see if Matt followed up with something. All right, Matt, I'm going to come back to your next question. All right, Lisa. So, a question from Lisa: how does the duration of the activity affect hydration? Right. So, hydration in and of itself, right, is just a percentage loss of body weight. That's it. It is not some super duper high tech science calculation or test or biopsy or something like that. It's just a very simple. If a 100-pound woman goes out and starts her run, she runs for an hour, comes back and weighs herself, and she weighs 97 pounds. She has a 3% loss in body weight. right? When you hit 3%, anywhere from 2 to 3%, that's considered dehydrated, right? So is that going to have any real functional degradation to your performance? No, not at all. Absolutely not, right? Once you got to get up into the 4 or 5, maybe 6% range, which quite frankly, most people that finish a marathon that have actively ran the marathon, or people finishing a half Ironman or an Ironman distance event, they're going to come in at 4 or 5 or 6% dehydrated, right? So ultimately, how does duration of the activity affect hydration? The longer you're out there without taking fluids in, the greater the chance you have to become more dehydrated. And then ultimately, the body will tell you, hey, what do we need here in terms of water? If the body says I'm thirsty, put some water in it. Very simple, right? So, the term hydration or dehydration, a lot of people make a big deal out of that, and ultimately it is a player in this discussion, but it doesn't have any physiological variables, if you will, like the concentration of sodium, like we talked about earlier, associated with it, right? It's just simple percent loss of body weight, right? And it's a good guide, right? Because if somebody comes in and they weigh them and they're down 10%, right? That's a big problem, right? So at that point, they're going to need to get into the medical tent and get an IV. And the good thing about IVs, kind of rolling back around onto the hyponatremia topic that we were just on, the majority of the IV bags that are out there nowadays have electrolytes in them, and it's been added in to not only facilitate intercellular transportation of the fluids, but it also, in case a physician or somebody misses the hyponatremia, they're not flushing straight water into somebody's situation, right, and into somebody's system, and ultimately, there's electrolytes in those IV bags. So, all right, Matt. So electrolyte drinks are essentially making me more thirsty because they're increasing my salt/water concentrations. Matt, you hit the nail on the head. Right. So that's a major problem. That's something that has to be accounted for. Ultimately, if you have your calories in whatever form they are for racing, you got to take the calories in. If you don't take the calories in, you're going to have a far larger problem. All right. So if you have calories tied up in a bottle of infinite nutrition, you got to take that bottle in. If the plan is I'm going to take one bottle that has 150, 200 calories in it, I'm going to take one bottle an hour, you're taking that in over the hour, whether you're thirsty or not. Because if you don't, you're going to create a far larger problem with not having enough calories. Right. So ultimately, when you're thirsty, you got to drink the water. Right. And that will dilute out the sports drink or the gel or whatever it is that we take into our system. That plain water will also help dilute that back out. Right. So basically, will electrolytes ultimately make you thirstier? If all you're drinking is sports drink, if you're not drinking plain water, yes. Yeah, it will. Will it be a noticeable thing in a sprint or an Olympic distance event? No, you're not going to notice it without really trying to do something silly. You get up into the half and the full Ironman distance, and that can start creating its own problems. You're gonna be a lot thirstier, and at some point you're gonna create a situation inside your stomach where your stomach's just gonna shut down. It's gonna be like, I do not want any more of this, right? And now you're gonna be thirsty. Now you got electrolyte concentrations that are jacked up, and you have no way to get more water in there to basically dilute out that sodium concentration to bring it back down, right? And that's a lot of gastrointestinal distress that we see people the half and the full distance really dealing with, right? So now, Matt, I know you're doing the Olympic distance stuff, so ultimately, when it comes into calories, the human body, as long as nutrition in general, day to day, is good, the human body can go out and perform at a high level for about 2 hours without taking in any extra calories before we start to see an issue, right? So for most, elite or professional caliber Olympic distance athletes, they might take in a quarter bottle of of a sports drink of some sort, get some calories in, maybe a gel, something like that over it, because they're all done more or less around that 2 hour mark. So for normal age groupers, if you're going to be out there for more than 2 hours, you probably want to start taking in some calories. If you're looking at the 2 to 230 range, I think a bottle of Infinite is going to be all you're going to need on the bike, and it's going to be more than enough to push you through the bike and through the run. And ultimately, there's aid stations on the run. So I hope that answers your question there, Matt. So we got another one from Lisa. Do you know what causes nausea on the run or bike and what the best remedy is to make it go away? I always feel if I eat some pretzels, it should help. It helped morning sickness and pregnancy. Well, I don't know that those two are necessarily related, but let's take a look at it. There are a lot of things that can cause nausea on the run or on the bike. Normally, people will have a lot more nauseousness on the run than they will on the bike. On the bike, that without really looking at some weird situation or strange situation taking place, ultimately taking in too many calories, right? Because your stomach only has the ability to process a given number of calories per hour, right? So if that's 20 grams of carbohydrates, let's say, and you stuff 40 grams of carbohydrates in there, your stomach's going to shut down on you, right? And that ultimately is going to be that nauseousness that you're feeling. That's most likely what it's going to be on the run, or I'm sorry, on the bike. Another scenario, you grab a water bottle and chug it, as you're coming into T2, stuff like that. Basically, anything that you're doing that is out of the norm or outside of what your stomach and system is really designed to handle. When it comes to the run, we complicate that even further because now we have a tremendous amount of jostling, right? So we've been out there, if we're looking at an Olympic distance event, we've been swimming for somewhere between maybe 20 and 30 minutes. We're out on the bike for hour and a half. So we're pretty close to 2 hours for a normal age grouper. Then you throw on, let's say, a 50-minute 10K. So we're getting up closer to that 3-hour mark. By the time we get to onto the run, we've already been at it for a couple hours or pretty close to it. If we've been taking in a bunch of funky nutrition, we've been taking in way too much nutrition, too much water, whatever it may be, and then you hop off and start running and that's sloshing around, that's going to create its own unique set of problems. So in regards to pretzels, will that help? That's really just an individual thing. I'm sure that would work for some people, and I'm sure for some people, the last thing they want is a pretzel, right? It's a very dry thing. It's very salty. If somebody is getting into that situation where they're either dehydrated, right, so they've lost a lot of fluid and have not replaced it when their body is telling them that they're thirsty, or if they ultimately get into a situation where they've been taking in too many electrolytes and they haven't been diluting it back out, I could see where the pretzel would create a major problem for you. But if that's, it really just depends on the athlete and what the situation is, what type of calories they're taking in. So another question from Lisa. Lisa, you are full of questions tonight, girl. All right. I have a real problem eating before a race, too nervous and trouble even force feeding. Once I get out of the water and onto the bike, I calm down and begin to ingest calories. Have I waited too long? Is it too late to catch up? Right. So Lisa, phenomenal question again. Ultimately, you want to do the best you can to have a good solid breakfast. Right. That's just the facts of life. Right. If you're too nervous, you just simply can't get the food in. You got to work on finding something that you can get in that will get calories in your system, right? Because keep in mind, your body's going to lose somewhere between 16 to 20 ounces of fluid or of water, let's say, just from breathing while you're sleeping, right? Your body is still burning calories, right? You are fasting when you're sleeping, right? That's why breakfast or breaking the fast, that's what breakfast is. So if you don't do that, you have the potential of really kicking off some more interesting and not very good catabolic processes that can really start affecting what's going on race day, right? So getting something in, whether it's you can just sip on a sports drink, whether it's oatmeal, a little bit of fruit, whatever it is, breakfast is going to be absolutely huge. All right. When it comes to, if I don't eat a lot, or let's say I eat a small breakfast, but then I get down to the race site and I'm sitting around and we got to swim and I haven't eaten anything, right? Because I'm nervous. I don't want to eat anything. And I get out on the bike where you ultimately, everything calms down and then you start ingesting calories. Is that wrong? Right. My answer is no, that's absolutely what you want to do, right? You don't want to be sucking down a ton of calories the entire time you get from between getting to the race site and hopping into the lake to swim or hopping into the bay or the ocean or whatever it may be, right? You're going to eat your breakfast. You're going to have, whatever nutrition plan you have in the morning, maybe a bottle of sports drink or whatever it is that you're sipping on while you're waiting, right? A lot of people like popping a gel right before they hop in. Personally, way back when I raced, I would absolutely pop a gel. I didn't know then what I do know now, but I would still ultimately do it again because I want the caffeine, right? So ultimately, you people are going to go out, they're going to do the swim. It's going to be anywhere from 1,500 meters to 2.4 miles, right, or 750 meters if you're doing a sprint. You ultimately are going to spend however much time that is in in a horizontal position, right? You're going to be swimming. You're going to get to the end of the swim. You go from being horizontal to vertical, and what that immediately is going to do is it's going to spike your heart rate. It's going to jack up your blood pressure, and that's just a 100% normal physiological response to spending, if you're doing an Ironman, let's say an hour 15, hour 30 swimming, and then popping up, right? Your body's going, whoa, hey, hold on, slow down. We've been laying down here basically for about an hour and a half. Now you're standing up, right? And what happens when you pop out of the water and you're heading into T1, right? You get out of there. If it's a decent sized race, you got a bunch of people down there at the venue. They're cheering and they're going crazy. And you guys tell me, does it not really feel like every single person there is cheering specifically for you? It's a pretty awesome feeling. It's one of the best parts of a triathlon, in my opinion, right? So you get out of the water and you're like, all right, we're done with the swim. Let's get on the bike. And you look and there's transition and everybody's cheering you on and you're fired up and you take off running as fast as you can in the transition. What's that doing to your heart rate? Jacking it way up even further, right? So ultimately, if an athlete can, handle the, going from horizontal to vertical without it creating a major issue, can keep control going from swim exit into T1 and getting out on the bike, they're going to be in a better position, right? But ultimately, going from swim to T1, that's one of the coolest parts of a triathlon, I think, right? So ultimately, your question was, if I wait until I get out on the bike to start taking in calories, is that going to be an issue? No, that's absolutely what you should do, right? One very common mistake I see is people will get into transition, especially in an Ironman, they'll start eating in the changing tents. They'll start sucking down gels, chugging on, Infinite or sports drink or whatever it is. Their stomach is not in a place or not positioned to do its job, right? It's not really capable of it, right? The stomach has to have blood being pumped to it in order to digest the food. When you pop up out of the water and then start hauling into transition, the blood is getting shunted out of the non-critical organs as much as possible so it can get that blood to the muscles that are needing it, right? So if you're going to try to dump a whole bunch of calories in on top of that, that's a great way to shut down your stomach before you've even really gotten settled in on the bike, right? Now, do most people shut down their stomachs before they get in there? No, they don't, right? But in Ironman, half Ironman, longer events, the nutrition, the positives and the negatives, or the good things and the mistakes that people make, they're cumulative throughout the race, right? So a very simple poor decision coming out of T1, you're probably not even going to feel that until you get onto the run, right? But you're going to feel it a lot when you get out onto the run. So ultimately, the advice I would give everybody is get out of the water, get the transition, keep it under control. It's not a sprint. You're not going to win or lose the race going from water to transition. You might lose the race, but you definitely aren't going to win it. Get out, get onto the bike, spend 15 to 20 minutes getting settled in, get your heart rate back down, then start your nutrition plan, right? So that works really well for half and a full Ironman. When we start talking about the sprint distance, the swim is shorter, right? So we're not out there for an hour or an hour and a half or 40 minutes or whatever it is, hopefully. So the amount of time on the bike that's going to be required to get that heart rate down before you have to actively start racing, 5-10 minutes, somewhere in there with the Olympic distance one, right? And then ultimately, for any of you out there that are actively competing and trying to, end up on the podium, win a race, qualify for a world championship or a national championship event, you got to race the race, right? And ultimately, this all comes back with nutrition, whether it be hydration, electrolytes, calories, sports drinks, whatever it is. You got to train this stuff. You got to test it and train it in practice, and while you're training. And if you don't, you're rolling the dice on race day. All right. So Lisa, great question, long answer. All right, Greg. Another great question from Greg. So for half or full Ironman, might be a good idea to use some solid food for calories instead of just liquid nutrition. Great question, Greg. In general, yes. Getting some solid foods in, it is going to provide some variety for you, and it's just going to be a little more, let's say, slower releasing because the stomach has to actively digest it. Right. So if you're eating a power bar or a Cliff Bar or whatever it may be, um, the one thing that everybody needs to keep in mind, especially at the half and the full distance, the more competitive that you are, right? Meaning that the positioning, the faster you are, the higher up you finish. When you are racing at a higher intensity, your stomach is going to have a lot more trouble digesting solid foods, right? So people that are going out to a half or a full Ironman and they want to qualify for 70.3 Worlds, or they want to go to Kona or whatever it may be, chances are if they're going to be somewhere in that 9, 10, 10 and a half, maybe even 11, depending on the race, hour range, they're working at an intensity that is probably too high for them to take in very many solid foods, right? So at that point, you're really kind of stuck with liquid because it's just simply your body's going to be able to access it and use it a lot more efficiently. So great question, Greg. Lisa, you are blowing up the feed. All right, Bill, I'm going to skip to you real quick. Back to the cramping issue. Do you feel that consuming protein during endurance training, racing, help prevents muscle fatigue associated with cramping? Great question. Hi, Bill. Good to chat with you again. My basic answer to that, no, I don't think that it does. Ultimately, protein in sports nutrition products while we're out training and racing is going to do a good job of making the athlete feel more full or more satiated. That's about all it's going to do, right? It's the human body is not going to start breaking down protein when its demands are carbohydrates. Protein is just not a fuel source. You're looking at either carbohydrates or fat. And that's just depending on metabolic efficiency, your crossover point, the intensity that you're moving along at. There's a lot of sports nutrition companies that will come out and say, "Hey, yeah, you want the branched chain amino acids, or you want this product that has protein in it, and it's going to help repair your muscles while you're training or while you're racing." No, it is not. Your muscles are not going to be able to simultaneously do damage to themselves, which is ultimately what is happening when you're out training or racing. It's not going to be able to actively be engaged in being used and tearing and destroying muscle tissue, and at the same time repairing it. Right. So your body basically, when you throw the proteins or branched chain amino acids, which are just the amino acids, when you link them together, you get a peptide. You get enough of them together, you get a protein. Okay. Ultimately, the protein is going to make you feel less full, which is always or usually a good thing in half or full Ironman distance racing. But what it's ultimately doing is it's just getting flushed right through your system. So that's my take on that. Let's see what questions we got here. Okay. We got Greg with another one. Any idea how much we might sweat during a half or full swim, or just focus on drinking when I'm thirsty on the bike? Ultimately, I have no clue how much you're sweating anybody would be sweating during a half or a full or a sprint or an Olympic. I mean, it's something that could be determined with the right testing and the right equipment and methodology. Ultimately, I think that there isn't a lot you can do to hydrate during a swim, short of drinking the water that you're swimming in, which I really wouldn't recommend for the most part. You're ultimately you're gonna lose what you're gonna lose with fluids. You're gonna lose what you're gonna lose with calories. You're gonna lose more calories as a percentage than you will, fluid or in terms of hydration, dehydration. But basically, I would say once you get onto the bike, that's when you want to get your heart rate down and under control to where it's an acceptable range for you, and then go ahead and start your nutrition and your hydration plan there. All right, let's see what we got. We're getting down to the end of this. If you guys got any more questions, we've got a few minutes left. Go ahead and pop them in here. All right, we got one more from Matt. When fueling during a workout, is there a certain amount of water needed to absorb the fuel source efficiently, gel or gummy? Um, it doesn't necessarily have to do with absorption. I think I would look at it more as if you, especially with a gel, right? So when you pop a gel, right, ultimately you got 100 to 140, calories that are in there, but you got a tremendous amount of electrolytes, right? Gels are ultimately designed to deliver electrolytes, and hopefully some more of these sports nutrition companies are picking up on this and are going to start reducing the amount of electrolytes inside these gels. But basically, what you're doing is you're taking this gel, you're dumping it into your stomach, and that gel is jam packed full of electrolytes. If we don't dilute that out, we are going to have a problem, right? Because if we jack up the concentration of electrolytes inside your stomach, your body will take blood from the active working muscles and transfer that back to the stomach in order to really take care of those electrolytes, right? And that's going to start to create a major issue for us. So what we'd rather do is every time you're going to take a gel or you're going to take a chew or let's say Gatorade or Infinite or whatever the sports drink is, dilute it out with water. Absolutely, right? So the basic rule of thumb I have for taking a gel, 2 large mouthfuls of water with each gel that you take. That's going to dilute it out and not create any major problems for you. So, all right, guys. So, hey, the next triathlon study hall is going to be next Tuesday, July 14th, same time, 5:30 Pacific, 6:30 Mountain, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern. For the rest of the month of July, I'm going to open up the study hall to anybody who can find the link and wants to register. Once we get into the August timeframe, the study hall or group coaching calls are ultimately going to be reserved for members of the Endurance Sports University. So keep that in mind. There's going to be a couple, lower priced options that are going to be available if you're finding that these coaching calls are really beneficial to you. So, all right, guys. Hey, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.